Welcome back to Basics. So this episode's going to be, again, a little bit different. We're doing quite a lot of different stuff. We're not going into planetary. We're actually going to be abandoning Alpha Station because it's been in orbit now for quite a period of time. I think, 10, 11 years. This crew's technically been on there most of the time, but we imagine they've been rotating. But I think it's time for us to leave Alpha Station. It's no longer the great shining star around Kerbin that it was. However, it's a shame to just dump it into the ocean. There's a lot of facilities there, and so I think what we're actually going to do is we're going to try and repurpose it a little bit. So join us for that. Welcome back. So you see me launching a special craft. This is a specially designed craft for this episode. The idea of repurposing space station components is not something that I have come up with. This is actually something that is in the mind of a lot of real life space agencies. For example, the Russian Space Agency has looked at the idea of taking components of the International Space Station and building their own space station with them should the International Space Station end its life. All space hardware normally has a shelf life, as we say. So you can see the craft that we've now launched into orbit. I'm calling it the Spider. You can figure out why in a minute. You can see it's got those 4 engines, and they come out and extend into this sort of structure. So this is going to be my vehicle for transporting primarily the space station, but also it's a nice little multi-purpose vehicle to have. It should have enough delta V to go to the Moon and back, and that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be taking Alpha Station and we're going to move it from Kerbin to the Moon. Now, I am not suggesting that this is what the Russians were planning on doing with their components in the International Space Station. No, quite the opposite actually. I think they were planning to lift the orbit a little bit but leave it around Earth. I believe that's probably changed now though, because there's been all manner of agreements signed. The big issue is with hardware in space. What do you do with it? Skylab is a perfect example of what happens when you don't really act quickly enough. It came down and made a bit of a mess of Australia. So while I'm talking, you can actually see that we're rendezvousing right now with Alpha Station. I will say this little this Spider, the RCS is not perfectly brilliant on it. I've got some RCS blocks on near towards the center of the craft, and that throws it off a little bit actually. It could have been done a little bit better. I probably should have put more RCS around the engine. You see there, it actually burns through RCS staggeringly quickly around the center core there. So, yeah, we're going to approach Alpha Station, and you actually realize that I've targeted the wrong bit. I targeted the pod with our 2 Kerbinauts in, and so I have to retarget and now aim for the actual Alpha Station. So, yeah, when you have 2 craft very close to each other like that, do make sure you read the full name of the craft instead of just assuming you know what it is. So, this Spider, the reason I've actually arranged it like this is I don't like the idea of the engines actually firing right next to the station. So that's why it's got this wide girth. Potentially this thing could land on Minmus. It could lift things from Minmus. It could land things on Minmus. It could be a multi-purpose vehicle. But this is basically its little trial now. So you see there's Alpha Station. It has nothing on board. It's basically computer controlled right now. We've got our science lab, we've got a hitchhiker storage container, we've got a command pod there, and it's still got quite a lot of RCS fuel on it. It's also got that engine at the bottom. Now, it doesn't have enough fuel to take itself anywhere on its own. It has enough fuel to deorbit itself, which was something that did go through my mind, and I thought we'll just get rid of it and put a new station up. But actually the idea of actually bringing these craft together and actually doing this is, I think, it's quite a nice little reuse. The International Space Station again is made of components from a large number of different space agencies, and a lot of the time they actually retain ownership of them. They have agreement for this, that, and the other Interestingly, things like components that are owned by the Russian Space Agency often were actually paid for in part by NASA, because during their original construction there was all sorts of economic constraints on Russia. So there's some sort of interesting ownership situations in there in the real estate in space. But there is, there's that interesting idea of, well, why do we not reuse things? Originally there was talk of reusing parts of it. And in actual fact, the ISS itself, its actual core components, the Zarya module, I believe, is actually was originally designed to be the core of Mir 2, and then it was basically restructured and redesigned a little bit to form what it now is, which is one of the core units in the International Space Station. So we have a dock there. That was, the space station did some of the work itself. It's got a bit of fuel. I moved some fuel around a little bit just to get the most out of it, and next thing is we're going for the moon, and this is just a standard little moon intercept that we're looking for. So you see there's a lot of RCS firing there. We have a lot of RCS ports, and there's a wobble. Now, in our previous episode, we actually looked at the Red Horizon, and it had the docking ports and the engines at the back, just like a normal rocket. I could have done that with this. I could have actually just put a craft with some engines on. These docking ports are very wobbly though, and you'll actually see while it's steering, I'm turning off some gimbal there. While it's steering, it wobbles, but when I turn the engines on, it really sort of settles down. We've actually got tension in those docking ports. They're actually stretching. You have a good look at them, you can see them stretching a little bit. I would not do this with anything other than nuclear engines. You put anything with more thrust in there, and you have a potential to pull your craft apart. You'll also see that the actual nuclear engines themselves are splayed slightly out, and that's partly due to the joints that they're actually attached to. I could have potentially put them in a giant fairing and had them rigid, but actually I quite like the slight sort of splaying outwards there, because it keeps that nuclear burning flame away from whatever you're actually carrying. So it serves a double purpose. You lose a tiny little bit of efficiency, but I think it looks quite cool as well. So we've got our rendezvous there. I check that we've got enough delta V to actually do this, and then we basically travel to the moon. Our little pilot there is just going to transport the moon. It's another trucker in space situation. We're just going to travel along there. We're going to get to our perips. You see, really wobbly until we fire the engines, and everything sort of settles down quite nicely at that point. And, the engines, ironically, are the thing that sort of stabilise it, unlike the last episode's rocket, where the engine sort of induced a little bit of wobble there because you've got a bit of compression going on. So we're now in the correct orbit. We decouple, space station positions itself in the right place, and job's done. It's really easy. So we do our burn back to Kerbin. Yeah, superb. So we're going to go back to Kerbin. We fiddle around a bit, and I'm aiming to sort of I want to bring us into the atmosphere. We don't have enough fuel to do a nice, well, we potentially do, but I don't want to waste fuel. And this craft has another little special sort of thing that it can do, and I accidentally target something randomly there. I think the targeting of the space station kicks in, but we get rid of that later. You ever see a red line like that? You know what that is. So we're looking at targeting a periaps just inside the atmosphere, because we want to get rid of some of that energy that we've now imparted into ourselves, because this is not a one-use craft, and also it doesn't have any parachutes. Yet again, I have not attached any parachutes to our craft, so we are going to position it into its special position for orbital insertion. You'll see we've folded it back. We've got the engines there. I don't want to have it full spider legs out, because those fuel tanks are susceptible to heat. Okay, they are not they're not fuselage tanks that you might find in space planes. They do have a little bit less resilience to heat, so I need to be aware of that. So we've tucked them into the main body. The other thing that I think is important to be aware of is that we have a docking port on the bottom. And now, looking at it, I think what I should have probably done is actually put a shielded docking port on for this, because they have extra thermal resilience. Luckily, I don't pay for it, but I think definitely a redesign would be to have one of those shielded docking ports on if you're going to do any sort of error braking. A normal docking port isn't the most sort of, shall we say, thermally stable of things. And now you see me getting rid of the targeting that I was actually having, because it was throwing off some of my stuff. So the docking port gets a little red there, and you can see we take just a little bit of energy out of our orbit, and that, you know, every little bit helps. You see, we're now at a reasonable sort of position. We like that. It's good. So we have our pilot now back around Kerbin. We've got a little bit of delta V we can play with, which is great. So we're going to come in for a second aero brake. We're going to keep the craft in this orientation, this position, this arrangement. You notice we've got solar panels on the outside, so we can actually fly around just like this. We don't have to push the engines out into the spider formation. What we're actually doing now, though, is we're going to do some burning, some impulsing at that periaps, because we're no longer at risk of burning up, and we want to use the all-berth effect to give us the biggest bang for our buck with the fuel that we have. And we're basically bringing our apoapsis right down as far as we can. Yeah, and this is it. What I'm actually doing now is, by burning towards the planet, I'm actually redistributing in many ways the energy that we've got, because I want to bring our orbit so that it's actually around 100 kilometers above Kerbin's sea level, because yeah, this craft does not have any parachutes, so we're going to have to rendezvous with it and get the pilot out, because we're not going to leave the pilot in it for a long time, are we? That's cruel. It's terribly cruel. So we'll spin around. You see I've got a maneuver node put in. We do a little bit of a burn just to bring our apoapsis above the atmosphere now, and yeah, we're going to try and just give ourselves a semicircular orbit, because, you know, we want to bring our pilot home, and we don't need to bring the whole spider home, because, well, in all honesty, it has use. All we need to do is fuel it up and it's ready to go again. So if we send a tanker up, we can fuel that up and it'll cost us a lot less than anything else. So we're just checking around, making sure we've got what fuel we've got left. We unlock the emergency tanks. This craft actually has emergency tanks of fuel for this situation, so that we can actually make sure we have enough to sort of do these rendezvous and orientations and things like that, and wonderful stuff. So we do our burns, and we're basically bringing ourselves, I think we're aiming for about 150 kilometer orbit. That means that we're within docking range of pretty much anything around the planet. Again, we're just burning downwards just a little bit to redistribute our energy a little bit. And yeah, so, and this is where you have to remember what we did last week, or last episode. We actually brought up a craft capable of carrying a Kerbal, and it dropped off our pilot to the red horizon. Well, that craft is still in orbit, and it's still capable of docking and returning to the planet. So I think we have a use for it. But before we do that, we've got to rename our space station, because Alpha Station is no longer the correct name for this. First of all, it is a space station, and secondly, well, it's no longer Alpha Station, is it? It's Mun Station 1. It's just Mun Station will do. So with that done, we need to get ourselves back to Kerbin. Before we can do that, we've also got the crew of Alpha Station to bring back, so they need to do their sort of drop through the atmosphere. And again, you know, they've been sat in orbit. This actually happened, I can't remember when, but it's just something to throw in there to show you. It's a standard return. This is our escape pod return capsule. It's, you know, it's got a lot of fuel on it. I think it's probably over-engineered. I could probably just stick a few RCS tanks on it. And just do it that way. But the one big thing is it doesn't have a heat shield, and for low Kerbin orbit that's not a massive issue, but it is always sometimes a worry, which is why we burn the engines coming up through the atmosphere. We drop the parachutes, they land, whoop-de-doo, well done. Now let's get to the main point, because, you know, they've basically been sat on a space station for like 10 years. So let's actually do with the people that have been doing jobs recently, shall we? So they land, that's very nice. Splash down, wonderful. So we're going to go to our craft from last time, and this is the basically the low Kerbin orbit delivery vehicle that we designed and sent up, and it's gonna do a little rendezvous here, and this is where this craft has really, you know what, its maneuverability was stunning for this docking. I can't actually, this was probably the easiest rendezvous and dock that I have ever done. Not the quickest, but the easiest. It was just it was an actual joy. So if you ever wanted to practice docking, get a craft and just balance it properly, because you know what, the impact that it has on your ability to do docking is staggering. So here we are. Here's our little return pod. It's just coming in, it's doing its burning towards, letting things get close, then it balances out its speed, then it burns towards again. We don't, it takes a little while, but these things, we're going at I think about 4 times speed right now doing this. Orientate towards the pod, and then you know what, I don't go into chase cam. I just, we'll just stick the camera behind it, and then I just, little burst thrust here, there, and everywhere. Zoom in, and it just comes straight down. It doesn't look the fastest ever, but it was just a really nice little docking process. We came in, docked away, and I actually, then it triggered these things because they did default to something else. So remember that is an interesting thing. If you actually dock 2 craft, the actual you can get a sort of knock-on effect where the joints and stuff start to trigger. Again, if I had Kerbal attachment system, I would probably strut those so they couldn't move. So we transfer our crew out, so now we've got the spider without any crew, and it can just sit there. It's not dead in the water, but it's got a little control core in there. We stick the antenna out while we're nearby, so it's now got communication. So we could bring it out of the orbit if we wanted to, but we're going to leave it because with a bit more fuel, we can use it for other things. So close up our docking port and prepare ourselves to return to Kerbin. So stick a node there. I would have loved to have landed near the Kerbal Space Center, but I misjudged my point of burn, shall we? And I was trying to go for the sea nearby, but one of the things I think, particularly after the shuttle missions, that I really want to work on is actually getting my craft to land, particularly through atmosphere, near something else. This is the first time returning with this craft, so I don't know its return characteristics, shall we say. I don't know how much energy it carries. I don't know how quickly it burns off speed. In the end, we're actually coming down in the ocean well before the continent that the Kerbal Space Program Space Center is at, and we're just going to come down in the sea there. You'll notice that the parachutes and everything are inside that little storage unit at the top. This is something I've started doing, and I quite like it actually. It just makes me feel safer. And we're done. So until next time.